Talk about pricing today. This is it's a weird part of the process. It overlaps with so many other ones, but we've tried to segment it down to a few concepts that I think are going to be super useful for you. There's some things in here that I've learned from industry experts at Simon-Kucher, from Price Intelligently, and various other like directly from them as well as elsewhere. And I hope some of these ideas, resonate with you and you can use in your own stuff. Or if you partner with us, this is the kind of stuff that we're doing together or we're doing ahead of time as we develop the ideas. So let's jump in. This is really about how to price before you have a product. So it's very early stage. Here at FutureSight, we're trying to build $100 million businesses, right? Things that have a lot of that, headroom, that they have $100 million revenue potential. We don't expect to see $100 million in, 5 years. Like we're not trying to do a D2, D3 type thing of like tripling, 3 years in a row and then, doubling a couple of times. But there's this famous post that kind of sums this up a long time ago. It's by Christopher Jantz. Throw your hand up or put a message if you remember this, because it's like at least 10 years old. And I remember when I first saw this, I was like kind of shocked. I was like, $100 million business? Really? Like how audacious is that? And now that's normal around here. That's exactly what we're trying to do every day. But really there's only, a few ways to build, a $100 million business in B2B. And so we also focus on B2B. So the first is you go enterprise and you're essentially, elephant hunting, where, you get some, a few $1 million customers, essentially. Or sorry, I guess they've got maybe and 1,000 customers. Sorry, 1,000 customers at $1 million each. Pretty easy. Sorry, no, 100 customers. I'm getting it wrong already. It's right here. The second one down is this concept of the deer, right? So you're not hunting something quite as big, but you need more. Like there's less meat on the bones. If you catch one, you're going to get through it, faster. And the whole like hunting analogy is a little bit weird, but essentially you need 10,000 medium-sized businesses paying you $10,000 per year. Or you can get 100,000 small businesses paying you 1,000-ish or a little bit more, per year. That's really hard to do. And selling enterprise is something we don't really do. So $10,000 is the price. We did it. It's lunchtime. Elizabeth, what else is there to talk about? Actually, there's a lot. So as simple as this chart makes it seem, as soon as you get into the little mouse and the flies here, you're more in a B2C business or an ad-supported business and like platform-y type stuff. We don't really do that either. We're talking about B2B businesses in the mid-market. So what do people get wrong here? If it was so easy, everyone would just price at 10,000, but not every product is priced at 10,000 a year. And there's still tons of $100 million companies. So how do we do this? Most early stage teams, kind of make one of a few mistakes. They just pick a price out of thin air, $10,000 because Christopher Jantz said so, right? Or I think it's worth it. They don't think about the fact that there's usually a small, a medium, and a large price or plan. And those are for different segments of the market. And there may not be 100,000 members of one segment of your market. But there may be, 10,000 who can pay a lot more. And it'd be more like a 25 or 50K ACV. A lot of people just blindly copy the competitors. You don't know if your competitor's pricing is working. You just know that that's the pricing they're at. Is it supporting their growth? Is it well accepted by customers? Are they leaving on the money on the table? We don't know. We just know what the price is. A lot of people overcomplicate it early on, and they try to create too many pricing plans and too many tiers and too many add-ons, and like build a hub and spoke model of usage and services and core and before they've sold anything. And we want to stay away from that as well. And the last is analysis paralysis and saying we got to get this right. Pricing is so important, right? And that's kind of the next point, which is it's emotionally loaded. You're putting a number on your value and it feels personal. And for that reason, people wait too long or they make a lot of these mistakes because they come from a place of emotion, not necessarily from a place of data or market insight. You're navigating all this uncertainty. So why bother? Like, just pick a price and be done with it, right? The reason why not to do that is because pricing is so powerful. I've heard various different ways of describing this, but in the SaaS space from ProfitWell, their research showed that pricing is 4 to 8x more impactful than acquisition. That an hour spent in one place versus the other, or a percentage point improvement in pricing is equal to a percentage point improvement somewhere else. It's almost always a bottleneck where if it's improved, everything improves. So that's why we're even going to bother and talk about this today. So what are we trying to really achieve? If we got pricing right in the early stages, what are we doing? We're matching the buyer's budgets to the price that we're selling for. We're not leaving money on the table, and we're actually able to sell them something as opposed to just being way over their budget and not selling anything. We're growing when our customer grows. This is really underrated of, as we find success for them, how are we able to capture more value? As we create more value for them, how are we able to capture more value? How do we have better sales conversations with and really prove out our ROI to the point where they're looking at the price and they're doing the mental math in their head? They'll be like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. I think I can pay this. Okay, I get it. I see why you've priced it that way," as opposed to objection. And then, lastly, we just want to be able to launch something and learn, and then iterate as quickly as possible. So let's get into it. How do we do this? Our sort of big idea here is that, most founders treat pricing like a decision. Is it this or that? It's more of a system. It's more of a structure. It's more something like you build. And so we put this into a pyramid. It's called the stack pyramid for stacking cash or stacking your pricing learning, whatever you want. It's called the stack pyramid. So it starts with segmentation. Like, you need to know in a market, who are you selling to? What's their size? What is their budget? And how are they ready to buy? If you're, selling to people in logistics, it could be very different in terms of which part of the logistics chain they're in, or it could be very different in terms of who they serve, or it could be very different in terms of where they are, or very different in terms of their customer size, right? So understanding those segments and who you're creating value for is very important. This overlaps with market sizing a lot. The second is understanding the alternatives. So what are they paying for today? Or tracking the alternatives. What are they paying for today? If they're buying a competing product, you do need to know what that price is. If there's some sort of a substitute, they're using something kind of unexpected and it costs them this much time or money. Is there an internal tool, that they've built and are paying to, keep up to date? What is the cost of the spreadsheets or the people that they have hired or the business process outsourcing teams that they have to solve a particular problem for them? If you know all of those, you can start to piece together, what the budget and what the value of solving that problem is based on existing market signals. The next is really aligning to your strategy. So figuring out, are you doing something? And there's only really 3 strategies here at the end of the day, and we would almost always focus on one, but also aligning on what is the first segment, to go to market to. We'll talk more about these in a minute, but the strategy piece is important. Different prices create a different type of business, even within the same market with the same solution. Next would be crafting the model. So building your first version of the pricing structure, one price, one offer, one clear starting point. And then kicking the tires with customers, getting them to try it out, validating in customer discovery calls, see what's working and what's not working, where are the objections in the early days. You don't need perfect pricing, you just need a starting point you can learn from. So let's keep going. How do we do it? Let's walk through each one of these steps in a little bit more detail. So market segmentation is challenging and not something I knew a lot about before we started doing this. Essentially, we want to do user interviews. We want to do market research to identify these different segments. You can look at size. Again, like I said, let's say we're selling to trucking companies. Most trucking companies are basically like one driver, right, with one truck. That's good to know when you're thinking about the overall shape of the market. Let's say we're selling to home services companies, but within that, maybe there's a few different types. You could go electricians, HVAC, plumbers. They're all one market, but then there's these segments in between them. Local healthcare services companies. So it could be chiropractors and dental clinicians and whatever. And you're either picking one within that or going a little bit, broader. Tracking the alternative. So then here's an example here of, I can't actually read this example. What did we do here? Oh yeah. So this was in private wealth. We were building something, and you can see the work we did to figure out what do these look like, right? These ones are green for a reason because they fit the characteristics of markets that we like to go after. Whereas when we map these ones down here, there's problems with them. Either it's the number of employees, it's how challenging it is to sell into them because they're more, enterprise driven, and our early stage products just aren't going to be able to fly there. Whereas, when we look at this, we can get excited. And so we've color coded this and decided already within this wealth management market, here are the segments that we're most excited about working with. All right, let's keep going. So tracking the alternatives, I'll give you 3 ways to do this. One is you can track time savings. So let's say, I'm looking at a wealth manager and I'm trying to figure out, how much time are they spending on something internally to do a particular thing or solve a particular problem or provide a particular service. I could say, oh, well, it costs this many people this much time, and then I can make a calculation on that, right? It could be revenue driven. And so, sorry, actually the example here we have is around an AR product that we were building. So this AR product, we were looking at it as well as saying, okay, if we're helping with reducing the DSO 10 to 30% and the cost of a 6% interest rate on whatever their total volume is, that's how much money we can add to their, essentially bottom line, which actually in this case ends up looking more like revenue to them, right? Then, so that would be the same with any sales, marketing, kind of like any front end, tool or service. And then lastly, you could look at saving money. If they were fully outsourcing this to another agency, this accounts receivable function, they might spend, 40 grand to get this done. So from here, we've got a sense of, okay, well, what is the metric that we want to pin this against? And we can start to, price against, we've got 2 data points that are similar, 36,000, 40,000. Okay, interesting. We can build from there because we know what they're spending today. All right. Aligning to the strategy. So there's really only 3 high-level strategies in pricing, or in pricing overall. The first one, and this comes from Simon-Kucher, there's cost plus, which is you basically take whatever it costs you to make a widget and then you sell it with some margin, on top of it. This is almost never used in software and tech, so it's not even an available strategy to us. The next one is competitor-based pricing. A lot of people use this. Oh, we're building, a verticalized note taker in this space, and all the other verticalized note takers charge per seat, and they all charge around $39 a month. How are we supposed to charge $400 a month if everybody else is at that price? It could be challenging, especially if you're taking that positioning of being a very similar product. As soon as you're competing with something directly in the positioning function, you need to know how much those other products are costing. And then the third is value-based pricing, which is how much value are you actually creating for the organization? And understanding the alternatives is a way of getting at the value. Number 3 is the strategy that we always suggest. That's, if possible, always aim for value and always try to differentiate. However, you also need to know the competitor's pricing, and that's the way of, kind of finding where are we the same and where are we different, and can we position ourselves as a different type of product that maybe has a higher price that is more aligned with the actual value created if you can quantify it, right? I'll share one more thing on this, which is just in terms of, we hunt deer, according to Christopher Jant's model, almost exclusively, in part because enterprise sales are too long. That's just part of our pricing strategy, because it fits with our market strategy. The sales cycles and the amount of capital that we put into a business just mean that we don't go there. We don't go B2C because we don't know how to do that type of business. It's not our specialty. So again, that kind of helps us with our pricing strategy. And then that changes the product strategy and the markets that we go into as well. So you can see how this price component touches so many other parts of the business. It just really gets, stuck into it. Next piece, crafting a version 1 price model. There's a lot of different types of value metrics. And so the idea of a value metric, this is a term, again, from Price Intelligently. We saw the quote from, or at least I learned it from them initially, which is, what is the metric with which you're charging against? So is it per seat? And there's lots of examples of if it's my note taker is in the room here today. Well, that makes sense for it to be 1 seat for 1 team member, right? I don't want Cindy's note taker or notes from her meetings as much as I want my notes. And we could both be in a meeting at the same time. So we need 2 seats, or at least we could be sold on 2 seats, right? Per project, a data insights, research tools, things that almost run a one-off or create a sort of wall around something, can be really good. Per active customer, like a CRM, Slack uses this model, but it could also be, an agentic customer service tool. Hey, it's managing X number of clients, for you, as an example. Then, per usage credits, let's say we have a voice agent that's making calls for you. Well, do you want to base it based on the call, or do you want to price it based on the potential expense that you could be running up? It's a lot different. If it's a 1-minute call versus, a 20-minute call in terms of your compute power that you're going to be running through, right? And so people are starting to understand where usage credits, may apply. Or it could be an outcome driven, which is really, really powerful. If you can close a ticket, for me, that has a particular business value. So do it. If there's a lead, if you can go from 0 to a lead, and that's an outcome that the customer is willing to pay for, if they hit a certain number of qualifications, and you can do that, you could potentially capture much more of the value that way than you could if you just sold it to me per seat, right? So this is why this stuff really matters. It completely can change the dynamics of the business from being, a $5 million business to being a $50 or $100 million business, depending on this one choice. So again, it's very, very connected. The last piece is kicking the tires with customers. And there's these kind of 4 big questions that you want to ask them early on, almost before you present anything. So in an early solution validation stage, we ask the questions, what feels like it would just be way too much? This would be way too expensive a price. You'd never be able to afford it, and you never want to pay it because it would just be too much. And this needs to be tied to an outcome, and it needs to be tied to a solution that the customer kind of understands and is interested in. You just haven't talked about price with them yet. And they're going to tell you what feels expensive. And more importantly, they're going to tell you why. They're going to tell you because this ROI, because it's only worth this much to the business, because. And that's what you're listening for. The next thing is, and if they don't say because, you ask why, and you get to the why. The second would be, what would be too cheap? What would be so cheap as a product that you just wouldn't trust me? If I said, I'm going to give you free flying lessons, it's I don't know if I should trust this Alan guy to give me these flying lessons. I don't think those should be free. That's too cheap for this. Whereas, a bargain, hey, these flying lessons are this price, that's way cheaper than anywhere else I've seen. I know what the competitors are, or at least I know I'm going to be making this much money back. Therefore, it feels like a bargain. And you can see the psychology of how people's wheels will be turning, with this kind of thing. And next time you're looking at pricing, you can get yourself in this mindset, as well. And then lastly, what feels so expensive that you're not happy about buying it, but you're still going to, because it's still worth it. Like it's just barely worth it. You're getting enough of an ROI turn off of this to make it worthwhile. So when we ask those questions, it's about watching for reactions. Do they seem put off? Not just their words, asking why, and using these questions as ways of not just creating a statistical model, which can be good, and you can ask these in a survey. But I find if you ask them in a call, you're going to be able to actually learn a lot about how the customer is thinking about the value that you're planning to create for them. And then lastly, if in the meeting that you have with them, if you can tell an ROI story based on all of the above, that's where, you want to listen for objections where they say it's not actually worth that much, or I don't believe that. Maybe you need to change the story. Maybe it doesn't have that type of ROI. And you can adjust accordingly before you build too much packaging, around the product when you have these conversations early. Okay, so to kind of recap, and then we'll move on. Patrick Campbell said, the biggest pricing mistake startups make is thinking they're not ready to price yet. So you just kind of kick the can down the road. And I made this mistake. I picked a price out of thin air, on a SaaS product where, we built an iPad app first. And then we said, okay, well, let's just charge 10x what this thing is worth, or sorry, 10x the iPad app. We'll just charge 10x that as a subscription because that was the best we could come up with, because we didn't think we really could figure out what the product was actually worth. So it wasn't that much money. It was more of like a token. And the amount of money that cost that business was, absolutely brutal in the long run in terms of really handicapping our growth, right? So, I'll sort of, try to finish with that, pricing isn't really an afterthought. It's your business model in disguise. For us, we pair this with our early segmentation data to tell us if we even want to bother considering, a market before finding a solution. If we can, at least high level, it needs to make sense. And we've all heard that, like I said before, a great founder in a bad market, can't beat a good founder, in a great market. So if we can control for it, why don't we just enter great markets that have the potential to price really well? So if you're going to price, you got to ask these questions. Do I know the size and the segments of my market? Do I know what customers already are paying to solve this problem? Do I know the cost of alternatives, solutions, products, or people? And can I connect my price to a clear outcome, some sort of ROI, or the value metric that is most tied to the delivery that I have, or the outcome that I have? And lastly, have I tested my early pricing ideas on 5 real customer conversations? Just throwing it out there, again, kicking the tires, asking these early questions and trying to create a defensible story. Those 5, it doesn't work out, try it on the next 5. Try it on the next 5. So that's the stack. Segment your market, track the alternatives, align it to the strategy, craft the first version of the model, and kick the tires on real calls. Don't wait for it to be perfect. Learn to get your price, then price to learn, and then just keep the loop going as you develop this past version 1, which is what we're really trying to do here.